hello. Let's hope the audio is working. Just checking audio. Checking out, is the audio working? It is. Always the first thing to check live stream. Terrible if the audio didn't work, it would just be a load of nonsense. But I think things are green. I haven't got any viewers, so I'm just going to start anyway. And I hope that it is live. So what am I doing? So I've been painting these guys. I'll try and bring it into the camera. 15mm sci-fi ground zero games models, little mechas, and that might be a little bit more in focus. You can see how small they are in my hand. And I did a live stream yesterday. Graham, hello, thanks for signing in. And yeah, so I've been painting these and I'm nearly finished really. So the idea now is to finish them, to do the bases, but also some final details on there. I thought I'd do some decals on there. So I'm going to do that amongst other things right in front of me. So I'm just going to zoom now down onto the workbench. Okay, thanks Nate. Yep, good. I'm glad people can hear me. So yeah, I've reorganized things here slightly, and I was trying to make sense of what I was doing the other day. And one of the first things I did the other day was I made a very small palette to mix the paint on, but I found myself quite frustrated by the paint drying out, and I normally use a wet palette, so I'm going to make like a mini one here now out of this old piece of plastic and just cut this up. And I thought, you know, why not start the activity by making the palette just to show how I use it. And this is an old miniature. You know, you get these, don't you, when you buy models all the time. This is another Dungeons & Dragons miniature case that I happen to have there. And yeah, so I've cut it out. And basically, essentially, a wet palette is a combination of two bits of paper. And I've cut them all to size here. One of them being blotting paper. Ka-ching. And that fits in there neatly because I've already pre-cut in true Blue Peter style. And on top of the blotting paper, you put tracing paper, or is it kit? Do you also? I think people also call that kind of. No, it's not wax paper. It's not kitchen wax paper. It is just tracing paper that you trace and use at school. So I've made some there ready to sort of put in as a cartridge when it runs out. But it truly is a micro-sized palette. I have a bigger one over there, which is, you know, traditional type with a closable lid. But this will do for just quick use for painting small things while I'm doing a video. And just to explode one of the myths of wet palettes, and that's that the ones that you can buy commercially tend to have lids that you can close afterwards. So you do your painting, close the lid, and wow, you can come back to the paint later, but that's not the case with miniature painting. I think wet palettes can work if you're using that kind of thick tube-based acrylic, and because that will stay moist inside a closed lid. What I've found from years of using these is that if you were to put any kind of normal miniature paint, which is quite thin, into there, you will find when you close it, you can break away, maybe grab a drink, go and have your lunch, come back, and the paints are still sort of okay. But anything longer than that, and the paints will just turn into a wet mess inside the wet palette. So leave it overnight, and you'll come back the next day to a sort of a smear of paint inside your wet palette. So this is the first thing that happens when you put the tracing paper onto the damp blotting paper. It'll curl up. And what I tend to do is then just flip it around the other way. And then it doesn't matter that there's a bit of moistness on the other side of the tracing paper, but it does then flip over and it's done. And I also found this was going all over the place when I was painting. So I'm going to try and, like, I've got a couple of these magnetized things here, little vehicles, and I'm just going to magnetize it down onto the top so that they're going to get a bit grubby in there. But it will stay in place because while I'm doing this, this was sort of shoveling all over the place, which is a pain. So I now put it there. So I've kind of really finished these. They had their wash, and which has dulled them down quite nicely. But I'm going to put some decals on, and these are fantastic. Yeah, man, how's you? I'm good. Mad Sniper Gaming, hello, I'm good, thanks. And yeah, these are Gundam decals by Bandai. I picked them up on eBay, or you can get them on Amazon as well, and they tend to come in on import from Japan. But obviously I'm not using them for the factions or anything listed on here. You can see some of the text says sort of Gundam. I'm just going to use them on these models just as a little symbols. And really, I've not left myself with much room on these to put decals on, really. So I'm going to have to probably just pick a couple of the smaller, brighter ones and stick it on the side of the turret, because otherwise there's just no room on this model for them. So I'm going to do that. So I'll need to cut those out. Plus, I'm just going to do this technique using the Privateer Press P3 Morrow White, where I just dot the corners of some of the highlighted areas on the models, and it just sort of makes them pop a bit. Shakes the paint. Oh, and of course I will zoom in to the activity so you can see it. So I'm just going to decant by using a rough old brush from the pot into my miniature micro-sized wet palette down here. Getting to gaming again. Any tips for painting? Well, hopefully you might see something. I'm kind of finishing these ones because I've done a epic, probably done about 3 or 4 hours of video streaming on these on YouTube and on Facebook. So I'd really like to get them finished now. And so I'm going to use a very fine brush. It's this another Japanese brush, Tamiya Modeling Pro. This is size 00 because I'm just going to do these little white dot techniques to on the edge paneling on these mechas. So and they'll work on anything that you're doing paneling on, really. But yeah, a smaller brush for this. And also I tend to drop a bit of this glaze medium in everything I do. Rather than thinning paint with water, I tend to thin with glaze medium, and it means the paint stays wet a bit longer. So I just drop a couple of bits of that on the wet palette, and then I'll mix it in with the white. Not much, just a little smidgen. Because I'm doing the edges, it's not really necessary. But if I was doing other larger areas, I use the glaze medium all the time. So a couple of drops of that in the palette to sort of drag into the paint is what I do. So yeah, I'll zoom in now and hopefully stay in focus. And then swing round. I've got a magnifier I use, which I mentioned in the previous videos. Tends to sort of get in the way of things, but it helps me actually see what's going on. In fact, I'll zoom out so you can sort of see, before I shove this magnifier in the way, you can see what it looks like. Big old magnifier. And yeah, I look through the glass. I look through the glass here, and it has lights on to magnify the miniatures on the other side. So I'll move that out of the way. Zoom back in. Get some semblance of focus out of that. Yeah, and I just want to pick one of these one up at a time, otherwise I'll start bashing them all over the place. Just lining things up so I can actually see what's in front of me. Yeah, so using the brush, I'm just going to be finding little edges where I'm going to dot the white on, because it's the end of the sort of painting on this, really. I'm not going to do anything more other than just do this white dots. Don't need to do them on every corner, but they you dot enough of them around, they will sort of make the model pop really when you've done the finished, when you've finished everything else. Like anything in any paint job, like fine art. I'm not a fine artist, I'm just a hobby painter, but if you were a fine real paint artist with real paint on a still life or something you were painting, there's an awful amount of white in almost everything you see that you don't really notice because you sort of switch it off. In fact, where I'm putting these white dots on the front here, this gun turret already had quite a lot of the white on it. And obviously in the previous videos I showed kind of the edge highlighting on these, so you could already see that I've kind of highlighted up a lot of these edges. It's interesting when I start painting, because I'm just obviously kicking off and I haven't done any other painting today. It takes a little while to get your eye in. Avoid the shakes. My connection is being spotty, so I'll watch later. Okay, thanks, Graham. Yeah, so this is obviously I'm streaming on multiple sort of platforms, YouTube and Facebook. So hopefully it's not the stream quality. No, it looks okay from where I am. The brush has gone a bit dry. Yeah, so hopefully you can see there's a kind of eye candy increase of a small percentage is what you're sort of after by doing the white dot technique on edges. But you don't want to go too far with it. Of course, the other thing is military hardware if you're into realism. All military equipment tends to be painted matte to avoid a shine or a glare, because obviously it helps avoid detection. However, in my sci-fi world of miniature gaming, I'm not fussed about that. I just prefer it to look a bit interesting. So that's that one done. Oh, so if I do a comparison shot now, and hold them both up, you can see. So one sort of with the white dots. And you see it doesn't take long because it's just tiny dots you're putting on certain panel edges compared to one without. It looks just a little bit duller. I mean, it's not 100% necessary, but it's something I just like to sort of finish off with. And also, I've done it after I've done the washes that I did on here with the life color darker washes, because they would have toned down a lot of the edges. And then these white dots will sort of lift that up again. Yeah, so I'm also trying to keep this video short, but I'm in danger of... Yesterday it was over 2 hours. The other thing the white dots do is they do give some definition to things that are out of sight. So a little tiny dot on a edge of the foot or something. Does shape, defines the shape of the foot because you can see it. And you can see it anyway, but the theory is that it defines the edges somehow, even though I've sort of done the edge definition anyway. I say the other thing with this is it's just don't do it everywhere. You just don't need to do it everywhere. Too much water on that. So there you go. I've made this like micro-sized, tiny white palette, wet palette even, and I probably put too much paint in. And I was trying to be conservative. Like I've only got a tiny bit of space here, trying to keep it all in the frame for the film, for the filming, and could have kept it even tighter with a smaller blob of paint. That'll do. That'll do. So one thing I did notice actually, while I was doing that, I noticed that on the front turrets there's sort of spots where I could put coloured lamps. So I might just use some white, particularly this one. It's got two areas where there could be a little bit of extra colour put on it. Sensor arrays or something, you know, whatever you want to call them. Infrared. So if I just paint them in white first before I put like a red or a blue on there, I might put a red and a blue, but it just means whatever paint you're going on top of that with is going to look much brighter. Particularly reds. Reds and things like yellows are awkward. So this one really doesn't have anything. I've already put kind of has a bit there. Yeah, I think I will put a little splat of white in. Slightly different gun on this one because I scratch, well, I didn't completely scratch build, but I kind of kit built some of these bits. That's just my brush tinging away. Right, so now I'm going to find a colour for there. I think what I'll do is I'll go on with a sort of dark navy blue first and then highlight up. So again, I'm using these I'm using these Privateer Press paints. And yeah, I'm going to do those in blue. I'm going to go on with the Signar blue base. I really only need tiny dots of this paint in the palette because I'm not going to use much. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, if someone's joined late or just joining and viewing, I made this wet palette just down here just a minute ago to start when I started the session, and all it is a bit of blotting paper, ink blotting paper, and then some tracing paper on top. And that combination gives you a wet palette, so your paint will last that much longer. And I also mentioned at the time that there is a kind of myth about wet palettes being this thing where you can put your paint and then maybe leave it overnight because you seal the lid, but actually with miniature paint acrylics, they'll just get too wet overnight and you'll end up with just a stain of colour inside the wet palette. So they're okay for when you're using it. They're not great for storing paints. So that's quite bright and clear, isn't it? The two white dots that I'm going to do as sensors. I'm going to do them both blue. And when you're doing any sensors or anything with, and you're using a technique where you're going to gradiate them. Is that a word? Gradient. Gradient is gradiate. Yeah, so you start with a darker colour at the bottom always, because that's the way that it works. In fact, you can, if you're doing this properly, I'm not on here because I'm just doing it quick, you would put black on the bottom, a little tiny line edge of black right at the bottom. You know what, I've just told you that the wrong way around. You know, I've just done this the wrong way around. It is the dark at the top. So let me get the one back. It's always the dark at the top. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be like that, but generally speaking, if you've got light coming down onto a glass or mirrored or lit kind of surface like these, you give it the dark stripe at the top and then you work down to the light at the bottom and then it looks cool. That's the idea anyway. And I'll show that by putting a tiny strip of black along the top, which I didn't get out onto my palette. And again, if you were doing this on a larger model, you would obviously take a lot of care and time to blend it up slowly, whereas I'm here, I'm just doing this very, very quickly. And really this just needs to be a black line across the top and nothing more. This one's a bit tricky because there's not really much in the way of room on those to make that show. So that's my black line done. Now I'll go back to the darker blue. Try not to completely cover the black. And then the light blue at the bottom. Is that even visible in the light? I wonder if I can boost the light. No. Just trying to see whether I can get that in focus a bit better. Yeah, it's really hard to see, to be honest. It's probably too small a piece of miniature to to do that technique on. The one thing I will show is that once you've done it, you do want to come back with a white dot. But just before I do that, I'm going to lighten the blue. So the bottom of the lens just has a kind of rim of the very light blue, which has just been mixed with some white on it. And then just the white dot on the top, which has to be kind of micro small. Try and do it both on the same side, so there you go, kind of slight lens effect on the two blue bits on the top of the gun, 3D optics or whatever they happen to be on there. Yep, and the white dot technique's been done on them both, although it didn't come back. Very difficult to do this one's lenses because it's only got half visible, so I'm just going to do a little bit of blue on them and then a white dot, because they're not really that easy to see. As you can see, they're a little black. Yeah, so just a smidgen of blue in there and then just white dots on the top because they're just too small. That'll do the trick. So back in focus again. So they're done really, they're painted now. I mean, that was 10-15 minutes of fiddling about with that. I mean, do I put one of these on each of them? I think I will. I'll cut them out quickly, so I'll get my magnifier out of the way. I tend to just cut these straight out of the packet, although obviously there's nothing wrong with taking the whole thing out of the packet, but just see those two there as ones I wanted to use. So they're Waterslide Decals, I don't know how you should pronounce that, or whether it's just a USA, UK thing. In America they call them decals, and over here we call them decals, or I don't know. Or Waterslide transfers is the easier way of describing them. So with Waterslide transfers, they tend to come on a sheet, which means that's gone in my wet palette. That's fun. Which means you need to cut them out, and it's fiddly like I'm doing here, because if you don't cut them out, they'll come off on a big old sheet of transfer material with them, and you just don't want that. You want just the just the bit that's got the printing on, and these are rather tiny. So this is about to be spilled off, so I don't want to lose those. It's gone into the pot. Now, hopefully my hands won't quiver to pieces as I do the next one. So they're both in there, then just handy water sprayer. And again, this is just like a, what's this? Made in France Duralex. These are handy little pots to have around when you're doing anything really like this. They're now just here floating in the water. Then you need a dot to start to lift them off the paper. On a bigger vehicle or a Mecha or something, I might do a lot more of these, but these models don't have much room on them for these transfers. So just as a one detail, I'm going to add them on the side of the sort of turrets. It does take a few minutes for those to sort themselves out. So just while they're moistening in there, this is what the material I'm going to use. Well, the solution I'm going to use to put them on. Microsol. I wonder what that is. Probably a pot of water. No, it does soften the decal, the Waterslide transfer, as it says on the front on the tin. Softens to conform to irregular surfaces for a painted-on look. So very useful when you've got things like this, which do have irregular surfaces. Oh, and the scissors I used, just crowding things out here. Very good scissors. These are Tri-Tool by Hasegawa. Hobby, and they're just very easy to control because they've got a large handle. Plus, they actually are designed for cutting these up. I mean, only in Japan would they design a very specific pair of scissors that's just made for cutting out water slides. I mean, I use them for everything hobby, but yeah, they are useful for all sorts of little hobby things, in particular cutting these when you need a little fine thing. So I can see now they're lifting off in there, and they'll float free in a minute. That one there's about to come off. That one's coming off as well. And they're really tiny. So where am I going to put my solution? I have another tub of glass, and I mean, really, again, if you were doing an army and a few of these things at once, you'd want to decant out quite a bit of this stuff. As it happens for what I'm doing here, I only need a smidgen for a couple of little tiny. So, yeah, just a couple of tiny drops in there of the microsol and get it out of the way. So I now have the decal, and then I have a little smidgen spot of microsol in there. It doesn't smell or anything. My wet palette is curling up, so you can see what the lights are having an effect on that. To bring that back down again, I can put on some of those. Right, so that's nearly happening. And I will just get these little decals off out of there on the brush. So that is now on the brush. And then drop it on quick where you want it to go. Now the art of doing this is to not waste a lot of time moving it around. You just want it on there. In fact, if I just move in my magnifier, I'll be able to see what I'm doing. So as far as I'm concerned, that is now positioned, and then I will just let that dry. So you want the water to completely evaporate. It will dry on as a slide, then you can use the microsol on it to start to flatten it. So this one, and now again, just using the brush to pick up the decal with a blob of water as well, because it just then moves around a bit better. You can see it sort of stands out there. All right. I'm just drawing some of the wet off. Yeah, it's conformed to there quite nicely. And it's not a big thing, I'm just sort of showing a demo of it going on. So what I'm going to do now is finish the stream just for now, and I'm going to come back and do the bases, and actually I'll do the microsol on those when those decals have dried, which will be another 10 minutes or so. So I shall reconvene on my stream later. Let me just switch back. Great, so yeah, thanks for listening in. Going to take a break now for something to eat. We'll be doing a little bit of a stream again later, and we'll show the bases work being done. Okay, thanks for listening in. Cheers, bye.